are you? So I'm going to be talking about relationship sex education providers again. I did BISH UK and Educate and Celebrate, and this time we've got the School of Sex Education, another one of the peddlers of harmful gender ideology in schools, and this time we throw in a little bit of critical race theory too. I'm going to look at their book and go through some of the points that come up about them. So before we make a start, in case you're getting ready to go at this early juncture, I want to talk to you about secrets and lies. And I want to draw your attention to a fabulous, fabulous woman who is taking a really, really important case that I want you to go and support. So her name is Claire, and I want you to go and follow her on Twitter and have a look at her case, which is her, I'm going to put her in the bottom, which is No Secret Lessons. So in order that I don't get it wrong, I'm going to read you Claire's case summary because it's much better that I do it properly. So basically what she says is, I'm a parent who's concerned about indoctrinating teaching and lack of transparency in our schools. I was denied access to the slides used to teach a sex education lesson to my daughter. The kid had reported that the lesson included some controversial claims regarding, and this has come up quite a few times, including the idea that we live in this heteronormative society and that this is not a good thing and that she should be sex positive in her attitude to relationships. And this is something that we'll talk a little bit more about. I was concerned that these views might breach the Education Act's prohibition on political indoctrination and also fail to meet the school's Equality Act duties regarding protected fundamental beliefs. The lesson was provided by an external charity called School of Sex Education. Who are these people? And at the time they had inappropriately explicit lesson plans on their website and live links to their teacher's private company, which advertises sex toys, pornography and anal masturbation techniques to young people. This presented a potential conflict of interest and possible safeguarding risk. Essentially, she'd made a freedom of information request, which was declined on the grounds of commercial secrecy for the charity. She therefore referred the case to the Information Commissioner's Office, and, to which they denied the claim. So basically what she's doing is she's making a case against the Information Commissioner's Office so that this decision is overturned, because essentially, we can't let this stand. It's something which has come up again and again and again. We had got to the point where, in fact, in Miriam Cates' Westminster debate, which I've mentioned before, she had got the Minister for Education at the time to agree that parents must have access to all of these lessons, but it was done verbally, so it never went into writing, and then sadly we had all of this whole ministerial changeover, so we're still lobbying hard for this to be put into writing, but of course at the moment we're not seeing anything coming out of the Department for Education. So please go and follow Claire. Her case is vital for parents all over the country. We must try and support it. Give her a few quid if you can afford it. It's really good. She's also incredible. She's really, really, really interesting woman and has great opinions on these issues. She's very knowledgeable. In case you're new, just to kind of bring you up to speed in terms to put it in context with what I'm going to be talking about. In 2020, the Department for Education inserted a couple of words which have absolutely mullered us. Okay, they put in the words gender identity and compulsory into policy, which basically has meant that we cannot get schools to see the bigger picture and the harms of gender identity ideology and the fact that many of us do not agree with it, and we do not want our children to be taught it. And so we're in this raging battle with schools where they have this non-statutory guidance from the Department for Education, and if we complain to Department for Education, they pass it back to schools. Schools pass it back to the Department for Education. Ofsted are highly invested. They're completely captured, and the third-party organisations are basically earning massive amounts of money. and parents are basically stuck in this loop. The other thing they said that should happen is that it should be put throughout the curriculum. So of course these organisations have taken that full advantage of this and essentially are trying to get gender ideology into literally every single lesson. So the idea that you can opt out, or this opt-out clause from RSA for parents is utter nonsense, because of course it is literally across the board, and there's no way that you can opt out of it. Kids are literally being drowned in rainbows, gender theory and also critical race theory. We've got this weaponization of words, basically, which is harming children. And at least on the plus side, we've got the NHS at least trying to slam the brakes on in recognition of this huge social hysteria which is impacting upon children. But this is like turning a cruise ship, and obviously we've got this significant level of capture in every single body, including medical bodies, teaching bodies, professional bodies. So of all of these 200 or so organisations, it's like, remember during COVID when you had all of these pop-up organisations who all tried to come and suddenly say that they could be mask and hand sanitizer providers. It's very similar to that, all under the umbrella of equality, diversity and inclusion. And they have no training in child protection, in child development, safeguarding, etc., as is very apparent in this unit, let's have a look at them. So, welcome to the Big Banana Company, which I presume must be a big clitoris school of sex education. So they say they are an inclusive teenage guide to sex and relationship, and as you can see, they are backed by lots of different organisations, including the lottery. And I absolutely love a good book, because when they publish their nonsense, I'm going to buy it and I'm going to review it and I'm going to tell you all about it and save you the pain. So the lessons wise, you can't get to see what their actual lessons are because of copyright reasons, like I mentioned before. But they will tell you a little bits and give you a bit of a clue in some of this. You can have a look at their website, obviously, and see little bits of it, but they've removed quite a lot from their website, and I know this because I've obviously looked at what was on their website before, and this book is supposed to be about teens, and the bottom line is that for the majority of it, you would be hard pressed if you were a young person reading this for the first time to work out what was what, because they don't use the terms girl, boy, woman, man, because it's all gender neutral. So you have to work out what organ goes with what in order to try and make sense of it. So before I start going completely off the wall and having like a mega rant, never in my life did I ever imagine that I would be the Mary Whitehouse reincarnated.
By breakfast, the transformation has already begun. From Mary Whitehouse, wife and mother of 3, grandmother of 2, to Mary Whitehouse, public person.
Last Thursday evening, we sat as a family, and it was the dirtiest program.
What Mary Whitehouse saw in the sexual revolution was risk, danger, filth.
Right? And for people who have ever worked with me, they would literally laugh their socks off, because, I'm a massive believer in good sex education. I've said to you before, sexual health is my background. I've taught thousands of people about sexual health. I worked with the people who designed the National Sexual Lifestyle Survey. So, it's not that I'm anti-sexual health, but I do think it puts me in quite a good position in order to be able to appraise this. So my overall set of concerns when I kind of started this was about the erasure of adult-child boundaries. And I think, that's like the biggest problem with a lot of this. It's about at what point does something stop being appropriate for children and adolescents, and finding that line. And that's always the issue here. But the problem that I see right off the bat with the people who are running this is they are basically orientated towards adult sex positivity, is what they call it. Their tagline is that they're 100% unembarrassable, which, you know, fine. But their CVs are what actually shocked me more than that, because I looked at who the authors were doctors, teachers, activists and artists, and I thought, okay, you know, that's fine. I'll have a little look a bit deeper. But what we actually had was a journalist, a chemistry student, a PhD student and teacher, a leader of queer groups who had a background in psychology, whatever that means, a background, and someone who makes penis models, a trainer of better sex workshops, a sexual violence prevention and specialist, a consent enthusiast, a worker with young people, whatever that means, a junior doctor with an interest in sexual health but who was taking an open-ended break from training, that's never a good sign, who has a blog called Squish Squash Squelch, someone who queers up spaces, okay? So my opening servo, when I started delving into these people, is they're very orientated towards adult sex positivity. One of their taglines, which really disturbs me, is they are about stepping away from heteronormative and monogamy-based assumptions. Now, is that monogamy-based assumptions something which we want to be talking to young children about? There's some parts of this I don't actually mind. You know, the essence of their narrative is that they teach consent, sexual health, online life, body image and sexuality and so much more. But the so much more that I fundamentally object to is the gender ideology. We support schools to provide age-appropriate, inclusive, non-binary, trauma-informed and sex education programmes. They trained staff and teachers. They had trained 67,000 young people had taken part in their workshops. So essentially we've got all this kind of gender neutral language. The word woman is raised, and we have this pregnant people, and we have a lot of penis and vagina sex. They don't discuss the risks of anal sex at all, in terms of the fact that women are more likely to get anal trauma through anal sex, because their sphincter is weaker because of hormones, and they have a lower sphincter pressure than men do. Surgeons are actually worried about the increase in the amount of women who are coming forward with incontinence and damage because of increased percentages of women having anal sex, and of course that has come about through pornography. The National Sexual Lifestyle Survey, which I mentioned before, is noting that anal sex in heterosexual women has increased from 12.5% to 28.5%. And of course, that's only the recorded cases where people are actually reporting, you know, brave enough to report. So let's look at pornography, because that seems to be one of the big pushes within this whole sex positivity movement, and this rush that these adults teaching kids cannot seem to get into their head that many of us do not see that this is something that children need to be taught about, and that there are dangers afoot. And within this book, and this School of Sexuality Education, they have this page which says ethical porn. So if you go and have a little look at what that means, because it seems to be associated with this whole liberal view that some types of porn are good and acceptable, and that has some kind of foundation, that the people doing it are having, you know, a jolly hockey stick type of time, and it's all you know, great, and there's no boundaries being breached, and, you know, it's a kind of sex work is work type of experience. And there's loads of different ways of coming at this, but let's think about dopamine and the prefrontal cortex and brain development in children, because we know that that takes quite a long time to process. We know that there's some correlation between pornography and it being addictive. Okay, there's loads and loads of evidence about that. we also know that it's based on a reward system, and that when you access pornography and you get a sexual gratification from it, that whatever point you access it at, there's going to have to be an escalation in order to get to the same level of reward. It's like in other addictive circumstances, to get the same level of high and satisfaction, you're probably going to have to go in a trajectory of escalation in order to get the same level of kick or high of it. So whilst you may enter, for example, at a point where you've got, this ethical, gentle love story, for example, this is, how they're describing it, form of ethical porn, where, for example, there isn't supposed to be the choking, the slapping, the degradation of women, the sadomasochism, the violence, the hardcore anal, etc., etc. In order for young guys, for example, to get sexual gratification from masturbation, there is going to end up having to be a trajectory because of getting that level of satisfaction. The other thing about dopamine is that it doesn't just keep regenerating. It takes a little bit of time to regenerate. It's not immediately available, so you get that kind of slump before it builds itself back up again. Once you've used it up, you're going to be in a deficit state. So there's also a lot of literature about the fact that normal family events or lifestyle activities that one could get up to, which would give you a normal sense of joy and satisfaction in daily life, become incredibly boring. Because, of course, when you get yourself into a habit of getting lots of satisfaction from quick dopamine fixes, then normal daily activities won't give you the same level of satisfaction. The other thing that there's quite a lot of discussion about in this adolescent population is the fact that they will become more withdrawn from the family unit. There's an increased level of secrecy, withdrawal, which is obviously not good. The other thing is about how that impacts on their ongoing sexual relationships as they develop as young people and develop bonds with partners. Because obviously pornographic sexual gratification can't be mirrored into a normal sexual experience, both in a physical way, because obviously, certainly in a male sense, masturbating is a whole different orgasmic experience to being, say, for instance, having penetrative intercourse with a female, because there's no way that they can replicate that physical experience. And that causes a lot of problems. And now what we're finding is young guys having a lot of erectile dysfunction. And that does have a name, porn-induced erectile dysfunction, because young guys, rather than just being the older guys coming and needing Viagra, you've actually got a young population requiring advice and assessment for erectile dysfunction because of pornography. And we could go on ad nauseum about all the different subgroups and sexualities and blah, 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 blah. So you've got the brain development, you've got the impact on their relationships, and you've got all of this level of dysfunctionality. This is not, a harmless issue. And that's before you even, I'm not even going to talk about the bigger political, issues around whether or not pornography is ethical, because I actually don't believe it is either.
Here's my stance on this. I'm a biologist and a neuroscientist, not a psychologist. But what we know for sure is that if an individual repeatedly engages in this circuitry, let's say masturbation and pornography, with increasingly potent forms of stimulation that are on a screen, a couple of things happen. First of all, what's being reinforced? What's being reinforced is a high dopaminergic response to watching other people engage in sexual behavior, which is very different than being in a first-person sexual experience, okay? So right there, you know that what's being reinforced is not actually any kind of improvement in communication skills.
Voyeurism.
It's voyeurism. And as these questions started to come in more and more, I started to realize there was a lot of kind of undertones of people talking about fear of or experience with sexual dysfunction that clearly pornography can lead to. And here I'm specifically talking about males. I actually don't know the literature on females. So here I'm talking about...
Females don't use visual pornography to the same degree.
I see.
They use literary pornography.
I see. So,
Yeah.
so, and then you start to think about, okay, what happens in the cascade or the arc of sexual arousal and orgasm? What happens is that initially there's it's parasympathetically dominant, meaning if somebody is too stressed, they actually can't engage in sexual behavior. The arousal response doesn't occur. Erection is blunted. But the actual orgasm response and ejaculation is strongly associated with the so-called sympathetic nervous system, which has nothing to do with sympathy. It has everything to do with, it's a kind of a stress response. And then it reverses to a parasympathetic response. And a hormone called prolactin increases dramatically after ejaculation in males. What does that do? That blunts dopamine release and testosterone for a very long period of time, which makes sense if pair bonding and sort of, in our species anywhere, there's this idea that then other molecules would be exchanged with partners, pair bonding, potential for raising mates, etc. Without getting into a huge discussion about that, the point is this: masturbation and pornography are potently tapping into the dopamine system and can undermine the very processes of which I consider healthy processes of finding a mate, dating, communication, eventually, if it's appropriate, sexual interaction,
Well, it also sounds like
etc.
it's undermining pair bonding.
And pair
Well,
bonding.
so here's a question: if you're seeking sexual release through pornography and you go through the whole cycle and you get a prolactin release, do you bond with yourself?
So this is very interesting. The biology explains it as what's left there is a kind of an open loop, a kind of an emptiness, right? Because bonding with the self is a complicated notion. I mean, there's a healthy version of that, of course, loving oneself and self-referencing. And again, this is more far more your domain than mine in terms of what a healthy self-relation is. But in the absence of a real partner there, absence of real sexual partner, there's an open loop of neurochemicals, including oxytocin and prolactin. The dopamine goes up during pursuit, anticipation, then peaks and then crashes below baseline after orgasm and ejaculation. So this kind of low that people fear is putting them into an amotivated state. We can think of this, if I were to kind of expand on it, would be it's this kind of neurochemical, psychological equivalent of making your home environment filthy for a while, not actually putting you into this positive amplification of dopamine. So it depletes the dopamine system. And it's likewise in drugs of abuse and addiction, it eventually depletes the dopamine system. Initially, there's a huge dopamine surge with drugs of abuse like methamphetamine and cocaine. But over time, people are using more and more to achieve what is not such a great high. You even see this a little bit with kind of consumption of energy drinks.
So as I move through this book, to be honest, it's really hard to keep this to a short video because there's just so much you could go into. So, look, Barry, the Eddigester, is really good on critical race theory, and I've no idea why they have this in their book. We've got decolonising. We aim to recognise and address the impact of colonisation, critical race theory. We got this section here, white beauty standards. White beauty standards are about white skin being best. The false idea is promoted in lots of different countries, and has lots to do with the legacy of colonialisation. And they go on to talk about white skin creams and all the rest of it. What this has to do with sex education, I literally have no idea. They go further because, of course, they want to embed these things, as the Department for Education, has stuffed us with across the whole curriculum. So they take that a step further and they want to say, have you ensured that all school buildings and facilities have been adapted as much as possible to ensure the school is an inclusive area for young people? So they don't just stay at the sex education part, they start to get their noses into the policy. Have you created and amended your policies to align with the principles outlined in RSHE? In terms of school culture, they go back to the critical race theory part, and they start dabbling in the Black history issue again. Have you ensured that this is embedded right across the curriculum rather than just in Black History Month? Are there topics that you, rather than, because remember the edict is that this should be delivered in a fact-based, scientific and age-appropriate way, and that's really important. That it is age appropriate. Bearing in mind that they're supposed to be doing this, taking board child development. But of course, here we have this. Are there any topics that would be more impactful to cover at an earlier stage? Now, of course, these people have no experience, knowledge, qualifications in anything to do with child safeguarding, child development, or children at all, from what I can see. Literally just about sex and adults. So they use this level of secrecy in their policies. If you were just looking as a parent from the outside and what was going on in the school, so you could have a little look. Because bearing in mind, they're not going to show you the lessons, because they said they denied clear that because of reasons of copyright. So if you're just looking at the policies as a parent and looking on the website, all it says is, it's in tiny writing, introduction to identity and stereotypes. So you wouldn't be able to tell anything from that just looking at. Another thing that was important that came up with regard to these people is they were using the Netflix series Sex Education as one of their resources that they were asking teachers to use, I believe, which has an 18 certificate on it. So it's meant to be for adults. But of course, children are not 18, they are children. So that would be a serious problem. So there you have it. And I think that this is the logical conclusion that comes of a centrist position, because essentially this blurring of boundaries between adults and children comes about when you allow the door to be left open. Intruders will come into it, and because of even within the gender critical fight back has got to the point where there is so much acceptance now of the fact that gender identity ideology is here to stay. Many people, despite the fact they don't believe in it, and they know that it makes no sense, they're willing to go along with it. And they don't see any purpose in trying to, push back against it. And I can, in some ways, understand why they take that view. But my side of the argument would be that this is the logical, evidence of why this is incredibly important, because this is what happens when you leave that little bit of door open. And in terms of child safeguarding, child development, people like this will always be opportunists. When you uncritically accept words like transgender child, and don't slam directly into, organisations who are clearly, blurring the boundaries between adults and children, then this is kind of what you're going to get, and you're going to get this incessant and pernicious use of things like pornography and gender identity ideology writ large, and so that's kind of always why I'm going to hold this hard line and bang on about the importance of ideological language, and I'm never going to be able to shift on it, because fundamentally I'm always going to look at it from the child's perspective and their well-being and the damage that can be done as a result of things like this, and the harmful effect that can come of it, because I'm always going to look at this from a kind of macro level, not just from a medical perspective, but also from a kind of macro political perspective, and I don't have a kind of personal investment in that. I do it, it is purely, I've got nothing personal to gain from that. And obviously, once you kind of frame this within a big public health perspective, and you look at this on a population level, you can't unsee that, and you can't then walk yourself back from it, because obviously you're talking about hundreds of thousands of children here. And lots of little organisations like this going in and propagating harmful messaging. So there's no way that I'm ever going to be able to just go in and go, okay, well, we'll take a little grey line on this, because that's just not how public health works, really. You know, it's a bit of a do or die situation, and certainly when I look at what Hilary Cass and her team are trying to do, that's what I read. I think that she's trying to take that kind of line. But the one thing I would say is that, and I've said it in a number of different ways, but I'm just going to say it again here, is that it's really important to remember that every single step of the way there is compromises being made, okay? She's making compromises because she has to, right? And then you have the NHS interim specifications. They're then making compromises because they have to. So then they're going to keep getting watered down. So by the time they reach the children, they're going to be almost homeopathic. So it's not our job to step in and also make compromises. Our job, as I see it, is to be the ones who are pushing back and saying, no, we're advocating on behalf of these kids. We're going to push back so that your limits are, we're shifting the Overton window. And that's all I'm trying to do.